I've not for the first time, I have to say, not fully read the brief that Mary kindly sent through to me a couple of weeks ago when I agreed to appear here today. And thanks very much for the invitation. But I just saw panel and I thought that's great. I know enough about the European Union to go along and answer questions and take part in a panel. So I've not prepared a speech. So the good news is you'll catch up any time that you've been delayed in terms of the timetable for today. But equally, there are a couple of, I hope, different types of points that I want to just bring into the room because I'm guessing from the response, the reaction that people have been getting as they've spoke, that everybody here sees the nonsense of the Brexit shambles that we're currently going through. And I don't want to labour the points that have already been very well made by previous speakers. But one of the things Mary did say was she wanted me to talk about what Europe had done for us. And it's almost like asking, what did the Romans ever do for us? And of course, as a politician turned businessman, the first thing that you inevitably start to think about are the investments that Joe Anderson and again others have spoken about today. So if you look at the infrastructure improvements that have taken place to cities and city regions, if you think about investments into towns that I represented and worked in, such as Skelmersdale and St Helens through European Regional Development Funds, if you think about the number of jobs, community projects, voluntary organisations that were supported as a direct consequence of very innovative funding methodologies that were introduced by Europe, all of those things we still benefit from today. And I think that you could put price tags on that. You will see European banners attached to those projects, again, as somebody mentioned earlier. But the one thing I wanted to talk about in terms of what the European Union and Europe absolutely did to transform this part of the world actually didn't have anything to do with direct cash and everything to do with transforming this city's reputation, image and self-confidence through something called the European Capital of Culture in 2008. Now, when I came out of politics, I set up this business called Downtown in Business, which is a private sector organisation which represents now about 900 companies across the country. Back then, we started in Liverpool. And in 2003, even though we'd gone through some improvements through things like the regeneration of the Albert Dock and one or two other things that Michael Heseltine, I have to say, should be given great credit for. The fact was that Liverpool was not necessarily seen as the best city in which private investors and others would be investing their money. And when we established Downtown back in 2003, there were many people who were trying to do things around property development in particular, who were struggling with the council because the council had a planning office and a planning setup that we used to, well, actually weren't used to taking many applications at that time for development, but those that they did used to take, they had a habit of just saying no to. And so our job was to try and change the mindset of the planning department to try and get some largely indigenous investment into the city. 2004-2005 hit, and Liverpool was awarded this marvellous prize that nobody really understood or appreciated what it was, but it sounded great, and it was the European Capital of Culture. And from that moment on, Liverpool became a place of interest again. Now, again, just to take off track for 1 second, I remember going to an awards dinner. I think it was run by the Liverpool Echo, actually, and John Bishop appeared, and it was about 2 weeks after the award was given to Liverpool as European Capital of Culture. And John, in his own inimitable fashion, said, "What the F do people of Venice think about that?" But nevertheless, we won that title, and not only did we win that title, we embraced it, and we put on a fabulous 12-month programme of events. And indeed, in the lead up to 2008, there were many great things that were happening, with people from the European Union and internationally visiting the city, often for the first time, to see the spirit, to see the beauty, and to see the ambition that Liverpool as a city had. And beyond 2008, we now have one of the strongest visitor economies in Europe. We are the best visited city outside of London and Edinburgh in the UK. We have attracted the International Business Festival, which is hosted here biannually and attracts attracted last summer 34 different countries into the city, all looking to do business and invest. And obviously, as the host city, we have a great opportunity of talking directly to those investors. And as I say, the self-confidence of this place now, in comparison to 15 years ago, is immeasurable. And so if you were to say to me, what is the biggest impact that Europe has had on this city? Yet the money's been fantastic. Of course, the regeneration projects that they've supported and got behind with European funds was terrific. But actually, giving this city back its self-confidence through actually culture, not cash, was the biggest single difference that was made to Liverpool. And my guess is that those cultural changes and that confidence is something that many other cities have enjoyed through Europe, although through very many different initiatives, and perhaps not as stark in their nature. And my fear as we perhaps leave the EU is that those cultural changes that we all accept now as being part of everyday life is about to be lost as well. And so when people celebrate, as they do if they voted leave, freedom of movement going, they forget that our freedom of movement goes as well. My children will not forgive our generation if we go through with this. I tell you now, and I've got lots of children. I've got 7 children. They all voted to remain, and they are still incandescent at the decision that we made a few years ago. And culture for me is something perhaps that we have not articulated as well as we might when we put forward these arguments and the case for remaining in the European Union. And I can't remember who made the quote. Alison will know, because she's much better read than I. But somebody of great learned ability once said that you should campaign in poetry rather than prose. And actually, when I think back to the Remain campaign, it was very much a case of campaigning in prose. I don't think we said enough about culture. I don't think we sold the positive messages of what Europe has done, not just for this country, but actually for this country and beyond, and how we benefited from that in a two-way situation. So that's sort of the speech that I thought of whilst I was sat there listening to the other fabulous speakers that you've heard this afternoon. But 3 other very quick points, if I may. Because I'm now in business, and as I say, work alongside 900 businesses across the country, I can tell you without any fear of contradiction that business is worried sick about the situation that we are in at the moment. Uncertainty is the thing that always kills growth. Uncertainty is the thing that businesses hate. And uncertainty of what is going to happen next has already started to impact on the economic growth of this country. And it's not all the headlines that you see. It's not necessarily Honda, it's not necessarily Jaguar Land Rover, and it's not necessarily big Brexit backers deciding to close their factories in the UK and move abroad. It's decisions from airlines like Lufthansa and Aer Lingus, who were from next month planning new routes out of Liverpool Airport, which would have created jobs and also clearly would have created yet another fillip to Liverpool City region as a destination city. Those flights have been cancelled because of the uncertainty that those airlines have in terms of Brexit. Not trying to scaremonger, we know the flights aren't all going to stop on the 1st of April or whenever the deal actually takes place, if it ever takes place, but it's just that uncertainty. We're not going to invest, we're not going to take a risk because we don't know what we're getting into. And I could tell that story many, many, many times about many of the businesses that we're involved with across the country. So jobs, growth, economic impact is happening now. That is unquestionable. The second point I just want to talk about is, in terms of business, there is not one business organisation, not one, in the whole of the country, whether it be Chambers of Commerce, Institute of Directors, CBI, I could go on, that actually thought Brexit was a good idea. They all came out and said, the deal we have got is the best deal that you can ever get. And I think from our perspective as business organisations, we then have to ask the question, why didn't the public listen? And I think the same that we can say of some of our politicians now can be said of business. There is a disconnection, a mistrust of entrepreneurs, the private sector, and that goes some way, I think, of telling you why we got the result that we got 2 years ago, 3 years ago nearly now, isn't it? And I think that if we are to move into the next phase of campaign, whether that be through a referendum or, as Kevin said, a longer term campaign, which I'm sure will happen, as to how can we get back in, how can we recover what we have lost, then business itself needs to start to pay much more attention to how we include people in growth. We get people to the point of seeing why business success is good for them and their families. And to do that, business, not everywhere, but in many places, need to change its habits, change its approach, and certainly, again, come back to that word, change its culture. And I think actually over the past couple of years, you've started to see quite a seismic shift actually in the approach and the attitude of businesses and the way they operate. And I think that's for the good. The one concern I have about simply saying, and I do hear Kevin, and you know, I do fear that we have a second referendum and the result went, let's say, 52-48 Remain. How could we really argue about, well, let's have best of three? What would our argument back to that be? I think we could end up in a situation where we make it very, very difficult. I'm still here on the side of having a second referendum because I just can't countenance the disaster that Brexit will bring. And the reason in the end that I say, yes, we've got to bite the bullet and go for the second referendum is simply this, and it relates to a lot of what Stephen said. I see the dangers, I see the pitfalls, but the danger of the longer term argument and the longer term debate is that will the European Union ever accept our return to the table under the terms that we enjoy now? And I have to tell you, if I was a German or a French or an Italian leader, my answer to that, I'm afraid, would be not, nine, and whatever else the Italian word for that is. Thanks very much for listening. Sorry I didn't have a prepared speech, but I'd be delighted to get involved in a conversation with you all. Thank you.